Welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ashley Braganza, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Sunaina Aytan on today's episode. Sunaina is a cybersecurity consultant with Airbus Protect. Her expertise is in cybersecurity management, security architecture, and AI risk management. Sunaina is also on the advisory board for Cyber London, where she helps to build grassroots expertise through education and by working with the AI startup community. Sunaina, welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. So Sunaina, welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've told the listeners a little bit about you. I just wondered if you could just say a little bit more about yourself and about Airbus Protect, please.
Perfect, Ashley. Thank you for having me. So, my name's Sunaina, and I've been in the security field for the last 7 to 8 years now. But more interestingly, obviously we've understood that there's a big AI adoption. And as someone from the cybersecurity professional, I was keen to get involved in understanding artificial intelligence, but from a security lens. So at Airbus Protect, I took on the role of being involved in the Trustworthy Council. So what that means is we got individuals from different areas of the business coming together to talk about artificial intelligence, understand the literacy aspect of it, and what we should be all doing to making sure that we're using this technology in a ethical and transparent way. I've also been involved in projects where we're looking at the security for AI aspect of it. So ensuring that we're creating AI models that are secure from a cybersecurity perspective, but that also covers transparency, and that covers ethics as well. We are also living in the European Union region. We have to take into account the EU AI Act and the regulations and the standards that apply to us. Airbus Protect being within the defense and space industry, so they have to make sure that we're complying to the right standards as appropriate. And at Airbus Protect, because we're working with critical infrastructure or working on critical infrastructure projects, and when we're talking about AI within a high risk level, the rules are constantly changing. There's a lot of confusion. So as a company, we're doing a lot of coming together, breaking down the silos between the different departments to make up to and understanding how we should be leveraging AI within the space.
Great, thank you, Sunaina. Some of the listeners may not be familiar with Airbus Protect. I just wondered if you could just give us a couple of minutes about Airbus Protect, please.
Yes, so Airbus Protect is an entity from Airbus as the defense and space company as we know it. And what we do is we focus on cybersecurity. So we provide consulting services in-house and externally as well. We have a SOC environment and we have managed services. We also focus on the sustainability space, and we try to follow a whole heap of different services that we follow related to cybersecurity.
Great, thank you. So let's get the conversation started. What I'd like to start with, Sunaina, is this phrase cybersecurity. I've heard it mentioned, I've read about it, but could you just explain what this term means to the layperson who isn't, like you, a cybersecurity expert?
Yes, so I always describe cybersecurity as being the police of the internet. So how we have the police on the streets looking after us, making sure that we're safe and locking away the criminals, cybersecurity is the same concept before the internet. So it's making sure that we're safe on the internet, we're using the internet safely, protecting us from things like fraud or scams, for example, or it could be a malicious actor trying to break into our systems if we're working for a company, or trying to steal our data. So cybersecurity is essentially the police on the online environment and making sure that we're using it how we should be using it in a safe and legal way.
That's a really, really lovely, straightforward example that I think we can all now understand, because otherwise it sometimes comes across as a piece of jargon and tech speak almost to scare people. But that's a really lovely explanation of cybersecurity. Thank you. And maybe if I could ask you to reflect on kind of why is cybersecurity so important, particularly in the context of AI?
What we typically see is cybersecurity has come into effect after we've deployed certain technologies. We saw it with the cloud environment, and we've constantly seen this. So we're constantly playing catch up. But with artificial intelligence, the conversations around cybersecurity has been primary. It's been a big focus. People are understanding the risks around artificial intelligence, but we also want to use artificial intelligence. So with cybersecurity, we're breaking down those silos, understanding how we can use AI in an innovative way without sort of holding back and making sure that we use it safely and securely. And these conversations are really, really important because we don't want cybersecurity to be thought of as an afterthought. So after deploying these technologies, it needs to be at the beginning in the pipeline there, and those expertise need to be involved in those conversations.
So for senior managers, and particularly senior managers who aren't haven't come up through the kind of technical line, what are some of the issues that senior managers need to think about when considering AI and cybersecurity?
So I love the fact that you talk about senior managers, because cybersecurity and AI isn't a technical issue. It should be considered at a high level within any organization. And for senior managers who don't necessarily have the expertise of cybersecurity, there's a few key main areas. So we first need to understand the data that we're using. So what data does that company hold? Are we using this AI and this data when we're adopting this AI technology? Is this technology using training on our data? We need to have complete transparency on the data aspect. We then need to, how I mentioned before, at Airbus Protect, we've got a trustworthy AI council. We need to make sure that all organizations are following that, because it's really important to have representatives from different parts of the organization, whether it's your HR, your developers, your ML engineers, your project managers, or your senior managers, whoever it is, around a table to understand exactly what's happening. We shouldn't be racing to adopt AI if it doesn't suit our company objectives. So it's always best to reflect on what are your company objectives and goals for this year. Can we use AI to do this in a more effective way? So it shouldn't just be like we're just blindly adopting technology that we don't fully understand. We need to be making sure that it aligns to the company's objectives and values always. And then, of course, with something like AI technology, it's complex. So we need to make sure that we've got the budgets in place and we have the education aspect. So if we don't have the skill sets, can we do some training internally? Do we need to hire the right people? Do we need to expand our scope to make sure that we've got that knowledge in-house? And I think we shouldn't be adopting any technology until you have those expertise around you.
So what would you say are some of the challenges that might be holding back AI adoption in organizations?
I think there's a few challenges, and I think it's, as we all understand, that there are risks that come with AI technology, and to order to like do this properly in the right way, we need to have the right expertise around the table, and that can be costly for some companies, especially for the SMEs that can't afford, ML engineers and to be creating out their own models. So they're going to be relying on whatever's publicly available. And if you are doing that, then you also need to understand the risks around that. If we can't create our own data sets and we're using synthetic data, we need to make sure that we're using synthetic data, we understand the sources that it comes from, and we are not just trusting things blindly. So that's a big issue. Education is a big issue, making sure that everyone in the team, especially people that are not technical, understand the AI literacy. So you're understanding what AI actually means. A big tip for that would be making sure that you've got an artificial intelligence policy in-house, that you've got that standard that employees can go back to. So should demonstrate exactly where and when you can use AI. If you're using, for example, ChatGPT or Gemini, at what parts of a project that you're able to use it, and sort of the clauses around it. So that policy should be in place too. And then again, I would just say that making sure that you've got a budget for it as well, and making sure that you understand that how costly this can potentially get.
And you talk about budgets, and I fully agree. And because otherwise it becomes very difficult to kind of make sure you're getting the right skills, software, hardware, and the team in place. In terms of that kind of budget, where should this budget be held? Is this something that the finance people should be getting? Because as soon as you mention budgets, is this something the finance people should be getting involved with, or is this the line management? Is it the CTO? Where does that responsibility for making sure the budget's in place, where does that lie in your view?
I personally think that it depends on where you're adopting this AI technology. So if you're adopting it in your HR department, then your HR representatives need to be involved, and of course, alongside your C-level exec. If you're adopting it in terms of developers, then your CTO needs to be involved in those conversations. It's just about having that transparency and exactly where you're adopting it, why you're adopting it, do you need it, and ensuring that that's made transparent across the board as well.
Sure. And if I could just take you back, you talked about synthetic data, and again, it's one of these terms that get used. Just expand a little bit, please, and explain to the listeners, what is synthetic data, and what are the ways in which organizations might use it?
Yes. So currently training models are trained on data, and that data could be potentially whatever is publicly available, or if you're using your own internal data. But as we know, that this data isn't exactly clean. So it's full of biases, for example, or could be some issues in the data, meaning when we're training our models on data that is contained with biases, then the output is also going to be biased. So when we talk about synthetic data isn't exactly real data. It's literally programmed data, but it's supposed to be made in a way where you're eliminating those biases, where you're eliminating those data concerns, where you're taking away personal information that shouldn't be used to train model data anyway. So you've got almost like this golden standard. But again, someone is creating that synthetic data, right? So there's always going to be some kind of loopholes or some kind of leaps in where something isn't entirely correct, or there could be some leakage of sensitive information that shouldn't be there but is there. So when we talk about synthetic data, it's crafted in a way where it should be used and can be used by anyone. But again, when you are using that data, you need to make sure that you understand exactly what's contained and if it suits your objectives.
So and I agree with that. So in effect, am I right in saying that even if you're using synthetic data, there is always the possibility of having bias in that data, even though it's apparently much cleaner than kind of ordinary data, if you like, or data that's come in from other sources, but that even within synthetic data, there is room for bias?
Yes, I don't think our technology is we can trust it completely at the moment. There always needs to be that human in the loop. And that needs to be, whether you're talking about synthetic data, whether you're talking about training your own data or public available data, whenever you're creating these models, training these models, there constantly needs to be a human in the loop at the moment. I don't think we can trust, especially now with Agentic AI, and with Agentic AI, there's going to be outputs being produced that we might not fully be able to explain how this agent produces output. So having a human in the loop is really crucial at the moment, because this technology is still developing, and we understand the risks, but there's going to be a lot of unidentified risks at the moment.
Yeah, and in terms of understanding how that bias plays out in the development of an AI system, I guess is really quite critical to ensuring that there is transparency and that it is a ethical AI that is being delivered. Look, we've used some terms, right? So take cybersecurity, synthetic data. These are quite technical issues. So why do non-technical senior managers particularly need to understand kind of the cybersecurity?
So cybersecurity doesn't just mean making sure that we're using technology in a secure way, making sure no one can hack into our data or steal our data. It also means that we're using technology in an ethical and transparent way. So it covers lots of different aspects. And for senior managers, aside, the biggest factor is the fact that we have to be law abiding in everything that we're doing. So if your company isn't following the regulations and the standards, you're going to be fined. There's going to be a big penalty. We've got the standards, like I mentioned, the EU AI Act, for example, which is, is all about data management within AI systems. So if your company's using AI technology and you haven't looked at that regulation, or you haven't taken into account the EU AI Act, then you could be in a lot of trouble. And people usually say, but why would someone want to hack me? No one knows, like, we're just a small company. We're not that important, and there's big efficiency. Especially with AI now, that our biggest risk in terms of security is supply chain risk. And if you're using AI technology and you're installing these plugins, or you're using a third party, then your data sort of ecosystem greatly expands. And if you don't have control over exactly where your data is going, who has access to that data, removing your data, how to remove your data, where is your data stored on these third-party systems, then you're putting yourself at risk. And also, you're not following the regulations how you're meant to. So in the EU, we have the EU AI. In the States, it's more fragmented. It's at state level. So every state will have their own AI Act, and Canada has their own policy, and then Australians have their own policy. So if you're an international company, you need to be taking all of those regulations into place. So yes, it can get extremely complicated, and you have to follow the law. So that's why it needs to be spoken at a senior level, board level, to make sure that we're having these conversations.
And you take me very naturally to my next question, because if you're in the boardroom, Sunaina, and the board said to you, so what are the top 5 priorities that we should be setting as a board of directors, as the senior leadership team of this organization? To put you on the spot, what would you say should their top 5 priorities ought to be?
Yeah, so if I was to go into the board meeting, the first key questions that I would ask is, where is our data? Who has access to our data? Do we have some kind of sort of overview of understanding what our data ecosystem looks like? That would be the first few questions that I would ask. I would then go into understanding is, what type of expertise do we have in-house? Do we need to make more hires? Do we need to do some more training? Do people understand what AI is? Set up that council, set up those communities. Then I'll go on to the third point in understanding in terms of what I previously mentioned is about budget. So what are our company objectives? What are we trying to do here? How can we leverage AI technology? And do we have the budget for this? And when we talk about budget, that needs to include cybersecurity. It shouldn't just be we're deploying this technology, we've got the budget for this, but then having no one to make sure that we're doing that in a secure and safe way, that won't map out. So to make sure that we have the budget. And then we need to go on to understanding the regulations and the standards, like I've also mentioned. So that's key, obviously, because as a company, we don't want to be fined and to, be served with these tough penalties. So are we following these regulations and the standards, and are we abiding by that? And then the last point I would say is, again, the education aspect. So are we talking about AI? Are we explaining AI literacy to those that are not technical? And do we have an understanding on where the company really sees the future of AI and making sure that we're deploying this technology in a safe way? So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about it at a policy level. So how I mentioned before, having your in-house artificial intelligence policy stating exactly where users and your employees can use AI and the terms and conditions around it.
Who, in your view, should actually own the internal AI policies and regulations? But I'm talking not the external regulations now, but the internal policies. Where should that set of policies be owned?
It depends on how your organization is laid out, because not all organizations will have a CTO or have a security team. But if it does, then typically their expertise is needed to understand, or some kind of information security or data management team. They're the ones that would have a big oversight on how artificial intelligence should be used in-house. Other than that, it definitely needs to be signed off from a CEO level, if you can, or the highest form level. Definitely needs to be signed off by them, and it needs to be made available to anyone and everyone. And it should one of those documents that should be easily accessible. So no one needs to be looking hard to try and find it. It needs to be there, very much present. And that's not just my expertise saying it, that's what the standards are saying.
And I guess there is a tension, isn't there, between, on the one hand, the CTO or the cybersecurity team to kind of have ownership of those policies, to make sure that those policies genuinely reflect the external legal and regulatory environments that the company is operating in. But on the other hand, you also need kind of every employee in the organization to be able to take ownership of those policies, because very often the breaches come through from someone opening, receiving an email, seeing a link, believing that email to be genuine, clicks on the link, and before you know it, there's been a breach. So how do you, on the one hand, manage this tension between the ownership of the policies by the experts, but the diffusion and the use of those policies and kind of living those policies across the organization?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that we need to break down silos within organizations. So, there's been environments that I've been in where people know that there's a cybersecurity team, but no one knows who they are. So that wouldn't work in something like this. So breaking down those silos between those different departments. So if you have a question, you know exactly who you can go to, or if you've clicked that phishing email and you're, as an employee, you're thinking, oh gosh, I can be into leaps of trouble right now. But if you have someone that you're able to go to confidently and say, this is a situation, this is what I've done, what can I do? Those conversations and bringing in those teams together, that's why I believe creating that in-house AI council was really important, because then you've got everyone from the different representatives of the different departments to be able to actually talk about it, and then you're able to identify risks or people's fears that you probably haven't even thought about. And so I think that's really crucial.
I think the notion of having a council, as you've described it, is really important because I think there is a real need to make sure, as you've said, that the silos are come down and people work across the silos. Would you mind sharing with listeners how Airbus Protect brought about and created the council?
Yeah, I don't think this is specific to Airbus Protect. I think could be adopted anyhow.
Sure.
But it's about selecting people that might have an interest, for example, in artificial intelligence, or even if they don't, sending out sort of the comms on what artificial intelligence is, making sure people know what you're trying to do here, and then getting representatives, and either they can volunteer or you can just select them if you're from a senior management point of view, maybe then holding maybe like monthly meetings or bi-weekly meetings on understanding, first of all, AI literacy, so making sure that that's sort of made clear across the board, as that's going to mean different things to different people. Understanding what your objectives are, your goals are, and talking about different things. And sometimes it's not just about internally. Sometimes those calls can be used as a training purpose. So if a new AI, like Agentic AI, for example, this is a new buzzword. What does it mean? Just having that communication going, and then, from that, the different representatives should be able to speak to their teams, and they should have that sort of knowledge. So if the teams were to ask them a question, they know exactly who or what to do.
Great, thank you. I am now going to ask you to do exactly what you've just said, which is, could you just give us a brief explanation about Agentic AI for listeners who may not be aware of what this is?
Yes, so I have a thought of a cool way, like I can describe cybersecurity using the police analogy yet. So I'm going to try to keep this as not technical as possible.
Thank you.
But imagine it as imagine like different systems working together to perform a task. So at the moment, you're working in a team, and you've got juniors, you've got seniors, and you've got your manager, and you've got your line manager, and whoever else, and you're passing information via an email chain or just talking or having conversation. Agentic AI is essentially doing all of this, or can potentially do all of this automatically within a very short time frame, and without you passing, or human present there passing around those notes. So for instance, if I have a personal AI set up on my device and I say to it, find me a bookshop where I can drink coffee at 12 p.m. tomorrow for an hour, then it will go away and it will be able to do all of those different things. So it's going to find me a bookshop that has a coffee spot inside of it. It's going to go to my calendar, make sure I'm free at 12, and block out an hour, and it's going to base it on where I currently will finish off my last meeting or whatever else, and be able to do all of this without me having to be involved in that process. Wow. So I'm trusting the system to be able to do that automatically. Understanding that will be taken in, sort of understanding exactly what I like, what I don't like, and understanding where I will be, where I need to go, and using all of that information. So it's not something that I need to go back and tell the system.
So a fairly major development in the AI space.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Sunaina, I know that through the work that you do with Cyber London, and that you also work with supporting tech startup companies as well. And a bit earlier, you did talk about SMEs. I just wondered if you could reflect on your experience in terms of working with these startup companies. I mean, what is it you think regulators can do to help SMEs and encourage SMEs to adopt AI?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because currently, if we're looking at the startup landscape here in the UK, especially with cybersecurity, we've got some really interesting work coming in. The government's providing the funding, which is great. There's real innovation that's being encouraged from a standards point of view. So you've got the AI Standards Hub, you've got the AI Security Institute as well. So these are great platforms SMEs can go to understand exactly what they need to be complying to. An interesting route that the UK have taken is that we're trying to deploy sector-specific regulation. So it's not going to be a one glove fits all. If you're working in defense, you're going to have different regulations. If you're working in military, you're going to have different regulations. If you're working in healthcare, it's going to be different, which I think is really crucial because we shouldn't be putting everyone in the same box. So for SMEs, use these resources. It's very much out there, and make sure that you're doing it at the beginning, so you're not sort of working backwards, because that's a lot harder. So take into account the key regulations that you need to follow. A big conversation is always going to be around data, so have that transparency. Make sure you understand exactly what data is being used, why it's being used, who has access to it, and if you don't, then seek out those expertise, because the sooner you iron out those issues or you have that transparency, the easier the next steps will become.
Sunaina, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today on the AI Adoption Podcast. There's some real insights here, and you've taken some really complex topics and some technical terms that I've heard about, and you've broken them down, you've made them really understandable and relevant to, I think, managers needing to understand the whole area of cybersecurity and why it's so important. I really appreciate the time that you've taken, and thank you so very much.
Thanks, Ashley. Thank you for having me. It's been a very fruitful conversation.
Wonderful. All the best.
Thank you.